afternoon. If you can make sure your phone is off. I know we all need to tweet and get phone calls, and we all run the world on a daily basis. We really appreciate it. At least it's going to be silent, and you'll be focused with us here today. My name is Shlomit Naim. I work for Makoma, the Jewish Agency. And I've been part of the ROI family and ROI staffing for a few years now. And before I introduce the members of this panel, I just want to say a few words about this panel and why do I think it's so important to have it. ROI, as you probably know, is celebrating its 8th year now. How many of you guys have been here already on ROI? Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I guess we have like 15 people that already have been here already. And it's the 8th year, and I think it's a great sign of maturity. And it's a great sign of being part of an establishment, although sometimes on the side of the establishment, that we're now able to approach the difficult questions of the Jewish people. Sometimes we tend to have these conversations and end up with yes, but we're all a big, one Jewish, loving family, and I'm willing to give up this and willing to give up that to be part of the family. And today we want to talk about those difficult things, those conversations that sometimes we do not have because we want to keep this kind of feeling of a family. And you know what? In families we do have discussions, and we do have arguments, and sometimes disagreeing is actually a healthier step in a relationship than nodding and saying yes, yes, of course. But we all probably know this already. So I'm really excited about the panel that we have today. And with us this afternoon we have Lisa Eisen, who's the National Director of the Schusterman Family Fund. And mostly, and probably that's how people here know her, she is the founding chair of the Israel Campus Coalition. And she's the founding and the Munich Past Board Chair of Prepare the World. Next to Lisa, we have Gidi Greenstein, who is the founder and president of the Reut Institute, which she established. And the Reut are doing an amazing job of revisioning and building an organization that can sustain a significant impact on Israel's future. And I have to tell you, they do an amazing job there, but I'm biased. I used to teach there, so don't trust me with that. To my right, we have Dr. Rachel Shabbat Betalachmi. Sorry, Rabbi Dr. Rachel Shabbat Betalachmi. You're approved. Come on. She's well, we'll see, Micha. She's a senior fellow at the Shalom Hartman Institute. And she previously was a vice president there. She is going to be, from July, the national director of recruitment and president scholar of HUC-JIR in North America. And last but not least is Micha Goodman. Micha has a PhD from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He teaches at the Hebrew University. And he's the director of the well-known and renowned En Prat Academy for Leadership. And he wrote 2 books, Guide for the Perplexed and The Dream of the Kuzari. Recommend reading them.
You wrote the guide? He wrote the Bible, actually.
No, that's not it. It was a woman who wrote the Bible. You got it all wrong.
The truth is, I didn't write the Guide to the Perplexed. That was the Rambam.
Sorry?
I didn't write the Guide to the Perplexed.
Yes, you wrote a book about
Yeah.
the well. You know, I don't think we could have afforded to get Maimonides to this panel.
Yeah.
We have limitations here, you know. So on this happy note, I want to dive into the first question about Judaism and gender. How should Judaism respond to adapt to the challenges of the 21st century? We have, you know, just last week we had Rosh Chodesh Tammuz. This week, Sunday, Rosh Chodesh Tammuz. We had Women at the Wall. On a daily basis, we hear about agunot in Israel that are binded to their separated husbands and they cannot start for a new life because they do not receive a get. We hear about gender equality in Israel. We hear about problems and issues and challenges the LGBT community is facing, not only in Israel, but worldwide. That is on one hand. On the other hand, we see the rise of ultra-Orthodox community. We know that the numbers are getting bigger, both in Israel and in other parts of the world. And on one hand, we have this kind of liberal part of the Jewish people saying, we have these needs, we have these rights, we want to be included. On the other hand, we have the other voices of the more ultra-Orthodox voices saying, we are also part of the Jewish story. How should Judaism adapt? You start.
Well, Chodesh Tov. First of all, it's a wonderful honor and pleasure to be here. I would say that one of perhaps the most powerful aspect of Judaism and the Jewish people is precisely its capacity to adapt. In fact, every good truth and ethical reality about humanity that Judaism has, to some degree, we learned it, experienced it, it was revealed to us in lots of other contexts and in different historical periods. So the period that we're in now is actually a very, very powerful challenge because we're at a place where we want to integrate many truths into a single place. If you take the example, I'll just focus on one of your examples, of Women of the Wall, what's fascinating about Women of the Wall, among many things, is that it actually brings three core questions to the forefront. Question number one, are women people too? In the sense that Women of the Wall actually forces to the forefront of discussion the question of whether or not women can play a completely full and equal role in the public sphere, Jewish women in the public sphere, in all places in the Jewish state. And that has caught that Women of the Wall, the group that has actually gone and prayed there for 25 years, which is not a reform group. It's actually a group that was founded and led primarily by Orthodox, conservative, now reform, and differently identified women over a 25-year period have been asking the question, can they be, and demanding a response to being able to be a women's minyan there reading from the Torah. So that's question number one. Are women people too? Can they fully be and play all roles in the public sphere, even in Israel? Question number two that it raises, and this is why it's so fascinating, is non-Orthodox Judaism legitimate in the state of Israel? Is a non-Orthodox understanding and way of practicing Judaism, is it legitimate in the state of Israel? That's another question that Women of the Wall bring to the forefront. And the third question is, do diaspora Jews matter in Israel? Meaning the understanding among diaspora Jews that the Kotel doesn't just belong to Israel, or it doesn't just belong to the Orthodoxy, or is not just an Orthodox synagogue, is the other set of questions being raised. Diaspora Jewry has said now very, very loudly and clearly through the Jewish Agency, through the Foreign Ministry, and there's been a lot of very, very positive work between the Foreign Ministry and the police and the Jewish Agency and the Prime Minister's office over the last year, saying for diaspora Jewry, now we understand. Diaspora Jewry feels a very, very deep connection to this place as well. So gender, this is all to say, questions of gender are not just about gender.
They're never just about gender.
The questions about gender here being raised by Women of the Wall are actually deep, deep questions of A, ethics, B, religious interpretation, and 3, the relationship between Israel and the diaspora. So Women of the Wall really is just a test case, in my view, of Jewish peoplehood and how we understand ourselves.
Thank you. Micha.
Here's a problem. The Wall is an Orthodox synagogue. That's what it is. The Wall is supposed to be a symbol uniting the entire Jewish people, but it's a wall that's separating the Jewish people. It's an Orthodox shul. And the point you made, first of all, I agree. But the point that you made is something I want to think about a little bit more in the following sense. The fact that the Wall is Orthodox has everything to do with the fact that Israel is Orthodox. This has everything to do with a very big mistake that the founding fathers of the state of Israel did many years ago in the founding moments of Israel. This is how I've come to understand their mistake. It's a natural mistake, but it's our role today to overcome that mistake. For 1,900 years, the Jewish people were stateless. We had no sovereignty, we had no power, we had no home, we had no state. Now what happens to people, psychologically speaking, when they're missing something? when there's something in their life that they don't have, they start developing irrational, inflated expectations about that something. 1,900 years without a state turned the state into a fantasy, and once the dream came true, once we fulfilled that fantasy, we wanted to overuse it. We finally have a state, let's give the state control over everything. And we made two mistakes. We gave the state control over the economy, creating the foundation of socialist Israel, and we gave the Jewish state control over religion. That was a founding mistake, an understandable mistake. We finally got him a state. We overused it. The past 65 years were attempts to overcome that mistake. Israel is going through a double process of privatization, trying to control the economy less. It's better for the economy. Hopefully, God willing, by the way, God willing, we have to privatize religion in Israel, which takes me to a second point. I hope I have enough time. A second point, and that's the fact that Judaism as a religion is suffering from the concept, from the notion that we can use the state in order to promote religion. In the 19th century, a great philosopher, Alexis de Tocqueville, asked the following question. He asked, how is it the United States of America is the most religious nation in the West? At the same time, it practices a solid separation between church and state more than any other country in the West. How is it America as a state is so secular and as a society is so religious? And de Tocqueville's answer was it's because as a state it's so secular, as a society is so religious. This is how de Tocqueville understood it. People have a tendency to develop a natural aggression towards concentrated power, towards politics, politician, and state. Once a state is linked to religion, so the natural aggression we have towards a state spills over to religion. This was de Tocqueville's theory. He thought this was true. 65 years into the Israeli experiment, I think we know this is true. We know that great resentment of Judaism is a result of trying to build a connection, a solid connection between state and synagogue in Israel. For the sake of our state, of our liberal democracy, and for the sake of Judaism, we have to overcome that founding mistake and minimize the connection between synagogue and state in Israel.
Thank you, Micha. But from what I'm hearing from you, it's some kind of a religious matter. And I wonder what we can learn from secular Israelis about this issue. Any answer?
I'm not a secular Israeli.
Well,
I'm
maybe,
gonna pass to
but I
Kitty.
think your input here is valid, yeah?
Well, look, I actually want to broaden the conversation and not focus it so much on the women of the wall and the state of Israel. I don't live in Israel. I haven't served in the army. I care deeply about it, and I'm watching with concern, and I have my thoughts about what's happening with women in this society. But I think we have a bigger conversation here about the role of gender equality and gender difference in Judaism and with the Jewish people. We're part of an evolving, dynamic religion. Judaism has always evolved and adapted, as you said from the beginning. And we have no choice. We have to adapt as a people, as a religion, as a state. We have to have full gender equality. We have to have full acceptance of gender difference. We can't afford not to as a people. How can we only use part of the potential of the Jewish people? How can we only validate 50% of the Jewish people and their right to live fully as Jews, their right to lead, their right to be represented? It's just not okay. And look, I'm someone who views myself as inextricably linked, a braid between being a woman, being a leader, being Jewish. They're not separable. And I think that Judaism demands that we all be able to live fully as a Jew, that we all need to be able to live our potential as humans, as leaders, as people, regardless of our gender, regardless of our sexual orientation. That's what Judaism calls for. That's what our values call for. It's happening anyway. There are more women in power in philanthropy, in community leadership, in innovation. They're adding tremendously to our future. They're helping shape our future. And we need them, and we have to validate that all people who want to should have a voice and an ability to practice what they want. And let me just actually read a quote of someone who I don't believe is not a nice Jewish boy, but a smart person, Warren Buffett. He said, "We've seen what can be accomplished when we use 50% of our human capacity. If you visualize what 100% can do, you will join me as an unbridled optimist about the future." What can we achieve if women are fully accepted, are fully able to lead, are fully able to live Jewishly? What can we achieve if everyone, no matter their gender identity, is able to participate and be part of our community? It's limitless, and I think we owe it to ourselves to make that happen.
Just a thought that occurred while you were speaking. I just wonder how much this room would have benefited if we had more Haredi people in this room. How much this panel could benefit it if we had Mizrahi, Sephardi Jews, leaders here around this table. And the same about the RY community. Do we really represent the whole of the Jewish world? And what is the price we're paying for not making sure these parts of the Jewish community are part of us? And I know that ROI does wonders about gender representation, and that's amazing. And it's a pleasure to facilitate a panel and to have other female around me and not just be the woman facilitating. And yet this question about we're not including is bothering me.
Well, look, I'm looking at my friend and colleague Justin. I think ROI makes a big effort to be very inclusive, to let voices be heard that aren't heard in other settings. And what concerns me is there are parts of our people that are separating themselves, and they are creating walls of separation. I don't think it's not that we would not want to include Haredi voices. I think that they would not be willing to be included. And I'm a bridge builder. I'm someone who believes in breaking down barriers, breaking down walls, not creating separation. When I look at what's happening here, I'm concerned that women are being separated. I'm concerned that people who have gender different identity differences are being separated and ostracized. I agree. We need to be inclusive. We need to hear those voices in this conversation.
Giddy, do you want to add it?
First of all, thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here with all of you. Really a phenomenal place. I took a walk around the space. Really, it's a great pleasure, and I hope you all enjoy it. When you speak first, you can play according to your game plan. When you speak last, everybody sort of, you have all these things you want to respond to, so I'd like to blend the two. First of all, I want to say that the idea here of adaptability is obviously crucial. I want to start with the famous Mark Twain quote, everything is mortal but the Jew, all forces pass but he remains. What is the secret of his immortality? This is Mark Twain. And Charles Darwin, at least was quoted, associated with Charles Darwin, who said, it's not the strongest of species that survives, nor the most intelligent, the most adaptable. So Darwin's answer to Twain's question is adaptability. In other words, the capacity of the Jewish people to adapt is the secret of Jewish survival, security, prosperity, and leadership. 27 centuries. So I'm not counting since Second Temple. I'm counting since First Temple exile. 27 centuries. And really unlocking that secret is a collective challenge for all of us, because we live in an era of profound change on many levels, which is changing the DNA of our society at unprecedented pace. And part of what we're doing is we may be tampering with some of the mechanisms that have ensured our survival. And that's really, in my view, that's the #1 challenge of our generation. Between what is going on in Israel and what is going on primarily in the American Jewish community, in the United States of America. Jewish community. As opposed to Latin American Jews here. In Latin American Jews, you can have a conversation in Hebrew. Not in the United States. So anyhow, and obviously in Europe, just got back from Berlin, really amazing things going on in Europe. The point is, era of profound change. And Judaism has always been very, very careful with change. I have to remind us that 1,500 years ago, 1,600 years, 700 years ago, the Colosseum was the arena in which modernity and humanity was played out in the fighting of the gladiators. And you had young Jews running there very quickly, and you had the elders of the community fighting back and saying, wait a minute, maybe this is not so good. So you always have this tension in Judaism between the conservative voices that are saying no, 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 and the progressive voices that are very quick to to engage any new idea, any innovation, and so on. And that is the tension that drives Judaism. Judaism is not about hand-holding and tree-hugging and hand-holding in the center, blending the differences. Judaism is about polarizing the differences in order to have a real debate about what is really important for the future of our community. So now I want to go back to feminism, to the whole tension between feminism and Judaism. And I'm saying this as a secular Jew, what is called secular Jew, in Israel, who lives in an environment that I believe in gender equality. I built an organization which is basically a think tank, 50% men, women, totally unprecedented in our field. And many of our people have been here in our eye. The argument of Judaism with regard to gender is very simple and I believe very powerful. Men and women are different and therefore they have different roles in society. We can discuss what these roles are. But this is the basic statement of Judaism. I am married to a Haredi family. I have a lot of secular friends. Where do you think you see more happy marriages? I'm asking. Haredis, you're right. That's my personal experience. With my secular friends, everything is negotiations. Everything. Who takes down the garbage? Who cooks dinner? Who takes the kids? Everything is open for negotiation. On the other side, clear definition of roles. Now, over time, I am not so sure that the argument that there is full equality on all levels will last deep into the future. And there is a very strong, powerful statement being made by only 10% of our population. And this is where I disagree with Lisa. 90% of the population is already in the progressive discourse. All secular Israelis, all progressive movements in America. It's 90% of the population. So we're only talking about 10% of a population who's actually putting forward a very powerful alternative argument. And that alternative argument is there is a distinction in the roles in society. And we can debate whether women can read Torah or not read Torah, pray at the wall, not pray at the wall, put talit, not put talit. All of these are open conversations. But the fundamental statement is what I'd like to focus on. There are different roles in society. Now I want to go back to the big picture. I'm sorry? Can I just say,
It was so beautiful, I'm ready to
you
respond.
wanted controversy, no?
Rachel will respond to that one.
Can I just say one more
Yes.
thing? I want to go back to the big thing, which is another fundamental statement of Judaism that I think is extremely powerful. Judaism basically says, and Micha, I'm sorry saying this in your presence, and Rachel, both rabbis, still I want to make it that following the argument. Judaism basically says the Torah is the code that God gave humanity in order to build and extricate from the Torah what is the model community. So we are in a constant process of interpreting the Torah in order to understand what is the perfect community. Men, women, individual life, family, community, synagogue, nation, people, the world. It's all there in the Torah if you believe in that, if you buy into this proposition. And what is the point here? The point is that if you buy into that framework, there is also a statement about the relative roles of men and women. There has to be. And this is why it's a very serious discussion. And the tension between Judaism and what is so-called feminism is never to be resolved. It's to be grappled with.
Thank you, Gidi. Rachel?
So now I'm imagining that Giddy and I are going to be dancing in separate circles at our children's wedding in the ultra-Orthodox community of Beitar Illit. And when we meet at the bar to get our Diet Coke, we're going to have this conversation again. Mazel tov.
Thank you.
That is all to say, so I have this ultra-Orthodox friend, and it turns out both of us have daughters who are both named Tehila Sarah. Right, my Tehila is in a secular Israeli school. She's 9.5 years old, and when she's at an Orthodox wedding with us, she always thinks the rabbi forgot to have the bride give the groom a ring. Because she can't understand why that wouldn't happen. Doesn't he get a ring too? Right, that's her worldview, right? And she can't understand why there can't be equal roles. That's her worldview. And my ultra-Orthodox friends, Tehila Sarah, has never seen a woman make Kiddush. and has never seen a bride speak at a chuppah. Right? They have two completely different worldviews when it comes to gender. If, however, we've done our job right and our interpretive job about Judaism right, then they are nevertheless being educated to see each other as fully Jewish, as full members of the Jewish people, and with full rights to be able to access sacred places and sacred roles as they see fit. I just want to clarify, this is not to say any critique of a Haredi lifestyle. And I will not begin to give an analysis of what I think is better or worse about a Haredi marriage versus my marriage. I think they both have incredible beauty, incredible holiness, incredible potential. My critique is of a quote-unquote democratic society that has the unfinished business of the 21st century, as Hillary Clinton calls it. The unfinished business of a democratic society that can't allow for those who choose to play equal roles in society. If we're truly a pluralist society, then there's time and room for all of our interpretations of Judaism to have a place. One more example would be at the Kotel. At the Kotel, a timeshare. I jokingly said to an Israeli interviewer in September that a good solution might be a timeshare at the Kotel. On Mondays, Thursdays, and Saturday mornings, it would be egalitarian, and the rest of the time it could be Haredi. Now, the fascinating thing about that is the Israeli interviewer didn't understand why that was funny, and didn't understand that I was kidding, and printed it. And what's even more fascinating is that since then, this idea of maybe there could be someday an idea of a timeshare where all different interpretations can share access to holy places in equal ways with mutual respect, with enough police force to protect us all, is one of the powerful things that a Jewish, democratic, pluralist state might give us one day. Chodesh Tov.
Thank you, Rachel. Really briefly, Micha.
Very quickly, Gidi, I'm all for a conversation, and we should have a conversation. The state of Israel, you don't have a conversation because somebody uses the power of the law to define an egalitarian wedding as a wedding that's not officially a wedding. And I want to say something to you. Feminism has its own power. I'm sure, Gidi, before you said what you were going to say, you took a deep breath. You said, I hope nobody's going to write this down or it's recorded or be on YouTube. Then you said what you're going to say because we know that there are social sanctions on anyone who speaks out against feminism. Now, that also blocks an open conversation. We know feminist social sanctions and no sanctions, official sanctions of the State of Israel in order to have an open conversation about the structure of family and ceremonies in Judaism.
Thank you. I want to end this discussion with the words of one of the most inspiring young Jewish people of 1896. And he's describing a visit to Jerusalem. And it's Friday, it's Shabbat really is entering at these moments. The streets, which at noon had been alive with traffic, were now suddenly stilled. Very few motor cars were to be seen. All the shops were closed. Slowly and peacefully, the Shabbat fell upon the bustling city. Throngs of worshippers wended their way to the temple and to the many synagogues in the old city and the new, there to pray to God, whose banner Israel had borne throughout the world for thousands of years. The spell of Shabbat was over the holy city. So writes Theodor Herzl in Altneuland. And this is his utopia for Jerusalem, for the public sphere, for how Jerusalem should look over Shabbat. I'm just putting this on the table. Just think how similar this utopia became true and how much we need that place of Israel, of Jerusalem, to be holy, to be sacred. And I wonder how much of that romantic view of Judaism is still in our discourse regarding equality, regarding Zionism, and especially in this discussion regarding gender. I want to move forward to another discussion, which we can say it's in the family. And that's regarding Israel and diaspora. And my question is, can we really talk? At Makom, at the Jewish Agency, we introduced the phrase of hugging and wrestling. We can hug Israel and feel involved and engaged, and yet we can critique Israel for different matters and issues. Does this goes both ways? Can Israeli Jews or the Israeli government critique diaspora Jews? Can we wrestle back? Can Israeli ask the diaspora about the lack of democracy in the Jewish community or in the Jewish establishment? Can we really talk about assimilation with diaspora Jews? About Aliyah? Can we have this conversation?
Well, it's actually very timely for me because I'm here at two conferences. I'm here at the ROI community, but we're also having a parallel conference. The leaders of our North American grantee organizations and the leaders of our Israeli grantee organizations. And what's becoming very clear to me is it would be amazing if we could have a conversation, but many of us don't have a shared language. And we don't have a shared sense of purpose of why are we all in this together? For me, the notion of global Jewish peoplehood with Israel playing a central role is just, it's part of who I am and what I do every day. But there are people who are here from the secular Israeli perspective who that's irrelevant to them. They're not talking that language. They don't understand, why should I be looking at myself as responsible for other Jews around the world? So I actually think, yes, the answer is we can hug and wrestle with each other. It's not my favorite language, but okay, we can do that. But first, we have to have a common language. We have to have a common sense of purpose. I think the fact that so much of how we've been defined over time has been about faith. And really what we need to come up with is a common sense of what is our mission as a people? What is our destiny as a people? What is our purpose? And I will be talking about this more, but I believe we have a common role of taking care of each other, educating each other, but not for the sake of just educating each other, but educating each other for action. Action around responsibility of Jews, North American, Israeli, all around the world, taking care of each other and taking care of ensuring that there's a future for our children. Taking care of Israel. I think we all have a responsibility for the state of Israel, and it belongs to all of us, and we all must take care of it. And also our whole purpose as a nation, which is to make the world a better place. This is the imperative. This is what we are born to do, to be a kingdom of priests and a holy people, and our job is to make the world a better place. And when we can have a common vision and a common framework for why we're here and how we talk about it, then I think we can criticize each other more fairly, and we can praise each other more fairly. So I think that's the starting place for this conversation.
So if we are family, we need to have those buzzwords for where's my toothbrush and who's going to buy the bread. And the next stage is this kind of shared discourse and open discourse.
Essentially, I think we haven't had the conversation about why are we all in this together? Are we all in this together? Why are we all in this together? And what does that look like? And what are the different pieces of that? And that's where education comes in. That's why the state of Israel and the world Jewry need to be working together on a common educational agenda, on a common language, on a common framework for how do we look at each other and how do we look at our future and our role in the world.
Thank you.
My point of departure for this is that Judaism has 4 founding stories. It's about religion and faith, about a specific covenant between every individual and the collective and God. It's about nationhood. We're a group of people that came from a specific place on the face of this earth, was exiled from it, kept uninterrupted loyalty to it. Given the opportunity, we came back. Third story is we are a people, we're a tribe, we're a family, shared history and destiny. And fourth story, as Lisa mentioned, is about our role toward humanity. We have a role to play in the world. So 4 stories. Every 4th story is rigid. Together, they create the flexibility. So flexible and rigid all the time. And what is very interesting about this, by the way, all these 4 stories stem from Abraham, Avraham Avinu, who was the person that came to the land of Israel and bought the land with his money. He is the father of all of us. We're all the seed of Abraham. He had a mission to the world, and he is a person who was willing to commit the ultimate act of faith by sacrificing his son Isaac. So all of these elements exist in Abraham. All of these stories are permanently present in the Jewish people, and with this I disagree a little bit with Micha Goodman over there. All of these stories were present in the Jewish people at any given moment. What is happening is that in any moment in time, one of these stories is dominating and becomes domineering. And this is what happened to Zionism over the last few decades. Zionism that started at a remote, distant corner of the Jewish people became dominant and domineering. And in this process, this is a very interesting dialectic. Zionism emerged because of peoplehood. The first arguments, what I mean is that Zionism came in order to solve the problem of the Jewish people. So peoplehood was the underlying reason for Zionism. And the first Zionists, they didn't speak about themselves. They didn't speak about the Jews that lived in the land of Israel. They spoke about addressing the problem of all Jews anywhere. They were a very small group, but their logic was peoplehood. And that's 1840s, 1890s. Slowly but surely, Zionism succeeded, and then became a tremendous success for the Jewish people, and then it became dominant, and then it became domineering, and it negated the diaspora. And that was the turning point. The negation of the diaspora is the turning point. So to begin with, Zionism was about peoplehood. So it's very hard for me to hear a Zionist that doesn't care for the Jewish people. It's like an oxymoron. How can that even be? Because the basic logic of Zionism is about the Jewish people.
But what are the boundaries of that kind of care? We know American philanthropists that can give Bibi Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, a phone call and tell him off for that bill or this bill.
Right.
How come we don't have Israeli members of parliament or Israeli leading figures calling AIPAC or calling federations and telling them, how come you're banning Peter Weiner?
Of course you do, and you have a lot of Israelis being involved. Israel was dramatically involved in the well-being of Jewish communities all over the world for all of its existence, whether it is Jews of Ethiopia, the Jews of Yemen in 1948-49. I don't even want to get into the story of how far Israel went in order to save them. 10% of the Israeli population at the time was brought over, dramatically weaker in terms of economic development, in 1949. This is care, this is responsibility. You have Israel today helping Jewish communities all over the world. Now, in terms of America and the United States of America, we have a different type of conversation because of the strength of the Jewish community in America, which is still equal to Israel. Still, not for a long time. But still, Israel and America are equals, and therefore we have a conversation of
Wait, what are you
equal.
saying about the future?
I'm sorry?
Still equal meaning?
The power of Israel, the economic, political, military power, the demography in Israel. 50% of the babies born in the world today are Israelis. For the first
in the Jewish
world.
in the Jewish world today, yes.
Alavai.
Valid point. So
With all due respect to Jewish mothers.
50% of the babies are Israelis.
That's your
In the
Haredi family taking care of it.
By the way, it's another paradox of Judaism, because, you know, we face assimilation. We face dramatic level of intermarriage because of the openness of our society. That openness of our society is what allows also Jewish particularism, like the Haredi world. And this is why you see these things always rise simultaneously. If you look at the era, forget today, let's look at the Maccabees. The eras of the Greek, openness, assimilation. At the same time, very strong, committed group, which are the ultra-Orthodox of the time, 23 centuries ago. Those two things go hand in hand. When there's openness outside, Jews intermarry, Jews assimilate, but the particular Jews, the ultra-Orthodox, they grow as well because it's a welcoming environment. And this is how our ecosystem balances itself out. We're all interconnected here. And that's why I think that it's much less dichotomy than we tend to present it.
Thank you. I want to answer from Rachel, and we might have time for Micha, depending on Rachel. See, there's a reality element here.
We're such good friends. Let's be honest. Israel is not any longer the unifying, covenantal Jewish peoplehood idea today that we might like to fantasize that it is. If we're really honest, I think that Israel is actually the greatest source of controversy and division and distancing from the Jewish people today. we might, those of us who are very involved and very committed, and I wrote my doctorate about covenant theology, like to fantasize about Soloveitchik's idea that we have a covenant not only of fate but of destiny, and now we can create this great Jewish future together. But I think if we're honest, we have to see that the biggest controversies and distancing and separations amongst the Jewish people and from the Jewish people have everything to do with what's happening in Israel. The North American Jewish community is deeply divided about Israel, deeply divided about how to engage in Israel, deeply divided about whether or not there's a place of true pluralism for Jews in Israel, deeply divided about how Israel should respond to how many years of occupation? Am I allowed to say that word here?
Try.
Can we talk about that? There's deep, deep division. So Israel doesn't necessarily serve as this unifying covenantal building force. Now, it could, it has, and it could. But currently today, I would say there's a huge question mark. I'm not speaking in favor of it. I'm saying let's be honest and talk about the real role that's happening and what the real divisions are. For a real conversation to take place, we're going to have to be able to tackle those extremely difficult issues together, and there's going to have to be a voice, a possible place at the table for all voices and for all opinions.
Thank you. Micha?
I want to notice what happened here. You asked a question, and you didn't really get an answer to your question. It was because it was the opposite question. And it wasn't really noticed, I think, in this panel. We're so used to the question, do the diaspora Jews have legitimacy to criticize Israel? Are they allowed to criticize Israel? If they criticize Israel, how do they do that? That's a common conversation that the Jews have with each other. Now you reverse the question. You ask, do Israelis have legitimacy to criticize diaspora Jews? And if we do that, how we do that, you try to turn the whole question around. Now, I've been thinking about this. Why is it that that's not a part of our conversation? I think it's not because of lack of legitimacy. We have no problem speaking about how diaspora Jews aren't good Jews. We have no problem speaking about how they're assimilating, how they're shrinking. I think it's also because there isn't any concentrated authority that represents diaspora Jews that we can actually address. But let's imagine that exists. And I want to try to practice on how would criticizing diaspora Jews look like. The only thing we have in common, Israeli Jews and the diaspora Jews, is the fact that we are Jews. But here's a problem. It's very hard to understand what it means to be a Jew. And the reason why it's hard to understand why it is to be a Jew is because Judaism itself has a split identity, because it's both a religion and the people at the same time. It doesn't happen too many times in history where something is a religion and a people at the same time. A great observer,
nationality, as Professor Michael Walter put it.
Aleph Bet Yoshua put it, Judaism is an androgynous. Androgynous, a Greek word, represents when a baby is born, and it's a mutation. It's both a boy and a girl, and nobody knows exactly how to define it. Hayahaduti androgynous, writes Aleph Bet Yoshua 17 years ago. We're both a nation and a religion, and here's the problem. I think Mordechai Kaplan articulated in a great way. He said, maybe we're not a androgynous in the sense we're not both a nation and a religion. We are a people that created an entire civilization, and at the heart of that civilization, there is a religion. We are a people that created a religion. Now, if we are part of the same people, is that possible? And I would argue that today, the ability of Jews around the world, and I want to focus on, Rachel mentioned North American Jews, I want to think that as a test case for the challenge that Jews around the world have, and that is that maybe it's harder for American Jews today to identify themselves with Judaism as a people, and Judaism in America is shrinking to being a religion and a religion only. Why is that? It's because exactly what Rachel said. I just want to turn it around. What Rachel said is a very serious problem. For many American Jews, Israel used to be a part of their identity. As Jonathan Steiner wrote once, Israel was the religion of American Jews. Especially after the Six-Day War, after the Entebbe raid, people were rooting for Israel. And as you know, when the people are fans of a team, the real fans, the ones that really look like the team, they dress like the team. When the team loses, they don't say the team lost. What do they say? We lost, which means when you're a real fan, the team becomes a part of who you are. For many American Jews, for quite a while, Israel is a part of their identity. Now, that was an important part of their identity because once Israel is a part of the identity of American Jews, that identity is a rich identity. It's not only about what you believe in, it's also about who you belong to. It's not about belonging, not only about believing, and belonging meaning they are a part of a people. Now, once Israel is out of the identity package of Jews, that package shrinks. Once you don't identify with Israel, your ability to feel a belonging to the people is crippled. And what my critique of diaspora Jews, specifically North American Jews, is the following critique. It's possible that the amount of Jews is shrinking, but also the identity is shrinking from being a people and a religion to being a religion only. In the following sense, if Israel is not a part of your identity anymore because of occupation and all these issues, and because something else happened, there was something very big happening in the 70s that connected Jews around the world to their Jewish identity as a people, and that was the successful battle to free Soviet Jewry. Now we're victims of that success. There's no big battle to excite us. There's no exciting Israel to identify with. And after the success of the battle for the free Russian Jews, and after Israel is not a source of inspiration, but maybe even embarrassment, there's nothing that connects you to the group that's larger than you, and as a result, your identity is shrinking to being religion only. That's my double critique of Judaism. It's not only that the amount of Jews are shrinking, also the identity is shrinking. And as a result, I think, the relationship with Israel is not about Israel. It's about Jewish identity. It's about the question, is it about believing, or is it also more than that, about belonging? Is it about faith and rituals, or is it also about belonging to a group that means something to you? I think that part of diaspora Judaism is being threatened as we're talking, and that's here a first attempt as an Israeli, that Israel offers me the ability to belong to a group and not only to believe in a faith. And in many, many senses, that identity option is being closed down for diaspora Jews.
I have to say something. I'm sorry.
Okay, jump in then.
There's been a lot of wisdom that's come out of this panel. I don't want to de-emphasize anything that's been said. We've named a lot of problems. I couldn't be in the business that I'm in. I couldn't work for Lynn and Stacy Schusterman if I was not about change. A lot of people in this room are doing work to change this. Yes, we've named some of the issues. They're real, they're tough, they're out there. But I don't want us to leave this room wringing our hands and saying, it's too complicated, it's too hard, we can't change it. I think all of us are people who are trying to make change in the world, and I think all
No,
of
it's impossible. Go home, give up.
Im tirtzu, ein zoagada.
But it was nice.
You all are here as change agents. And many of you are doing this work already. Many of you are doing work to try to create that sense of shared purpose, to try to create a rallying cry for the Jewish people, to try to connect Israel back as part of identity, to try to change Israel in a way that will make it more resonant and more appealing and more respectful for all Jews. And I just want to leave with the message of don't throw your hands up in the air. Please keep up the work that you're doing. Please address these issues. It's what I'm trying to do every day. It's what Lynn and Stacy Schusterman are trying to do every day. It's what a lot of philanthropists and community leaders are trying to do in Israel and in North America. And I want to just say, be positive, make change.
I thought that
Don't
was just our
despair.
introduction.
That's right.
I
I want to make one thing clear. Israel, the diaspora relationship with Israel is not about Israel. It should be about Israel. It's a vehicle to build an identity that's not founded on religion only. I think that's the big identity challenge that diaspora Jews are facing.
I want to close this.
And Israelis are not.
I want to close this question with one sort of threat that I think that is coming from what you and Gidi are saying. That the stronger Israel gets, and statistically more Jewish babies are born in Israel, and the more Israel owns the discussion over Judaism, our ability to create a healthy discourse with the diaspora Jew is going to be weakened. And as a Jewish educator, that worries me.
Shlomit, can I respond?
briefly,
Yes, very
because we have
briefly.
to
I
move
think
to
that
the
the
next-
major challenge is not outside of Israel. The major challenge is in Israel. Zionism defied diaspora. because Zionism was very, very small when it started. Again, I want to throw one number out there to give people scale. 1948, State of Israel is established. After 6 million Jews have been exterminated in the Holocaust, the number of Israelis 1948 is 5%, 5%, 1 out of 20 of world Jews. So when you're so small and you're challenging, you're the challenger, you're up and coming, and you're denying and defying the dominant power, dominant mindset, it's one thing. Today, when in Israel we move to being the largest Jewish community in the world, 50% of Jewish babies in the world are born Israelis, this is a very dangerous outlook, in my view, in terms of Zionism serving the logic of Judaism. Because one of the secrets of Jewish survival has been diversity, geographic diversity, cultural diversity, and so on. The claim of Zionism that the Jewish people needs to put all of the eggs in one political, economic, and geographic basket is absolutely crazy in terms of the longevity of the Jewish people. And therefore, our challenge is in Israel. Our challenge is to say to Israelis that a vibrant diaspora is a Zionist imperative. It is not a challenge to Zionism. It's a must-have for Zionism. And beyond that, and that I'm speaking to all those of you in the room that are not from the North American Jewish community, the United States of America Jewish community. That Jewish community is the second part of the problem, because between Israel and the United States of America, 80% of world Jews in those two locations. We have never been more prosperous. We have never been more vulnerable. As my young daughter said after the trauma of Purim, Haman, Pesach, Pharaoh, Yom HaShoah, Hitler, she says, Dad, if everybody comes to Israel like we want, it will be easier for them to get us. This is a 6-year-old posing national security dilemmas. But what I'm saying is, it is vitally important that we have diversity of locations. And that's why for the Jewish people today, 40,000 people in Budapest are exponentially more important than another 40,000 people in the Upper West Side. Or for that place in Uruguay or Argentina or Venezuela or Mexico or anywhere else. Because that's the spread of the network, that's the diversity, and that's vital for our survival.
Excellent, thank you. I want to tap back. I know there's a lot of questions in the audience. We're going to have some time later to hear your questions and respond to them. But I want to tap back on what Lisa said about being change agents. And I want to think together about our responsibilities. And the question that I want us to sort of end the panel and move forward towards our audience here is, in this era of human history, 2013, what should be the circles of responsibility for which I am accountable for, or for which us, the Jewish people, are accountable for? Who's brave enough to start?
I'll start. I love this question. I think it's all about the work that we do every day at the Schusterman Foundation. It's about how my family likes to live our lives. It's really complicated, but it gets back to what I said before. I think that we are meant to be a kingdom of priests and a holy people. And what does being holy mean? Both of my daughters, who read Torah and daven beautifully by the Kotel, I must say, and makes me very proud. They both had Kiddushim as their Torah portion for their bat mitzvahs. And what do we learn? We learn many, many things from Kiddushim, but one of the things that Judaism gave the world is Ahavta Rayacha Kamocha. Love your neighbor as yourself. The golden rule, it's called in the United States of America. So who are our neighbors? I think we're at a time of privilege right now. Many people in the Jewish world are at a time of privilege, and that enables us to be more vast. Times of scarcity, we're more narrow. And when we're looking more vastly, I think many people are our neighbors. We have to take care of our own family. We have to take care of our home. But we also have to take care of our broader people of Israel, and we have to take care of the world. And I believe that that's our purpose, to be partners with God in repairing this world. It's not Judaism for itself. It's not Israel for itself. It's to be a light unto the nations. And so we have a responsibility, I believe. We have all those circles of responsibility. It's gamze v'gamze. It's not just take care of our own and don't take care of the others. So that's my opening viewpoint.
Thank you,
I have more to
Lisa.
say.
Rachel.
So if there's one phrase that many North American Jews know in Hebrew more than any other phrase, it's tikkun olam. In fact, I would say that I knew more about tikkun olam than I knew about halacha most of my childhood. And then I learned about the Rambam at the Hartman Institute and from David Hartman. And one of the most powerful teachings of the Rambam is to understand that all of halacha is for what purpose? You might imagine it would be to serve God, or to fulfill God's will, or to fulfill the laws of the Torah. But in fact, he argues that all of halacha is for the singular purpose of tikkun olam. There can be nothing about Judaism, or in fact about anything that any of us does in the world, any of us do in the world, that isn't about tikkun olam. So I don't see tikkun olam as this sort of separate social action, social justice project that some people should be involved in, right? Tikkun olam should be the ultimate goal of everything we do. And the question is, how are we doing it in our family? How are we doing it in our community? How are we doing it in our shul? How are we doing it in our organizations, in our institutions? I think Giddy gave a great example of how he's done tikkun olam in his own institution. How are we doing it in our country? Lord knows we have enough work to do in Israel and in America. And if we're in a time of such privilege and luxury, of sovereignty and power and resources, then shame on us if we're not constantly doing tikkun olam in every single corner of the world. That is what it means to be a Jew, is to be engaged in every single corner of the world and doing tikkun olam to perfect it and bring it to the place that it could be. If we're so focused on our own internal debates that we're not engaged in tikkun olam, then we're in no way even beginning to fulfill who we're meant to be.
Thank you.
Well, responsibility comes with a strong sense that there's a change that needs to be made. You wake up one morning and you decide, I'll be that change. I'll be that change. But I think what triggers a sense of urgency that I can be that change is many times a crisis, but not only crisis. Crisis is not the only mode that triggers motivation to promote change. Opportunity does the same, and I would argue it does it even better. Now it's true that in order to create a sense of urgency, we have to change the world, we have to make it a better place. So the rhetoric of crisis works. The problem is that usually it creates a sense of urgency. We have to change things for very short term. I believe that opportunity has more power and more potential in the following sense. Crisis, when there's a crisis and you don't change your patterns of behavior and who you are and what you do, so the crisis will hit you and it will make you fall. But opportunity is at least as urgent, because when there's an opportunity out there and you don't change, you don't capture the opportunity, that's tragic also. So both crisis and opportunity trigger change. The question is, what's a better narrative? Now, my understanding is that, I tried to say before, that I think diaspora Jews are facing a crisis. Assimilation, the amount of Jews are shrinking, Judaism is shrinking, but I'm an Israeli. I fake an American accent, I do a good job at it. I'm an Israeli. And my responsibility is to try to think about Israel and Judaism in Israel. And my understanding is that Israel and Israelis are facing not a crisis, but an opportunity. Young Israelis all over Israel are rethinking their Jewish identity. For the first time in many, many years, secular Israelis are rethinking what does it mean to be secular. For example, a good friend of mine, Ariel, that's sitting here, opened, listen to this, a secular yeshiva. More than 10 years ago, right, Ariel, that would have been impossible. Because something is happening in Israel and something is happening to secular Israelis. And the way I've come to understand it, that in the 19th century, there were different attempts to revolutionize Judaism. To reform Judaism, actually reform Judaism was one of those attempts, probably the most successful attempt. To reform the religion, it's my understanding we are facing today an unspoken, undeclared reform movement, but this time what's revolutionizing itself is not religion, but secularism. It's happening, and it's exciting. It's happening as we're talking, and the core of this revolution is young Israelis. It's happening in music, it's happening all over Israel. And what's happening, I understand, it's not secular Israelis becoming religious, but Israelis becoming Jewish. The core of the identity is changing, and Judaism as a religion, which used to threaten secular identity, today is enriching secular identity, and it's staying secular. This is something that's starting to happen. If it happens, it'll have a dramatic change in Israeli culture and on secularism in Israel and on orthodoxy in Israel. Will it happen? It might not happen. This is not a crisis. There's an opportunity, but it creates anxiety because we might screw it up, because it might not happen. So if you're asking me, so I would say, yeah, we have a lot to do. And I think in the Jewish world, you're facing a crisis, and good luck with that. But in Israel, I'm not really cynical. But in Israel, I think we're facing an opportunity, and I think we have to gather a lot of strength, creativity, and energy in order not to miss the big opportunity that our generation is facing.
This is a great day for me because finally I found one point where I totally disagree with Micha. We've known each other for many years, and there I found it. The major problem is in Israel, in my view. Diaspora Jewry, Micha, 27 centuries. I think we are really, really rushed to say that they are in a crisis that they cannot resolve. 27 centuries.
Maybe they can resolve it, I don't know.
Diaspora Jewry has gone through the decline of Babylon, of Spain, of Germany. It will outlive the decline of American Jewry as well, USA Jewry as well. The challenge is Israel. In 60 years, we turned our back on 27 centuries of legacy of society building, of community building, of identity here. Now, some of it was essential with building sovereignty, but so much of it was totally unnecessary. We did away, in the diaspora, for example, religious leadership, the rabbis, have bottom-up legitimacy. Communities take responsibility for themselves. Here we have the rabbinate, top-down appointment, total disalienation from the community, from the public. The whole community structure here that existed until 1948 is gone. People don't take responsibility, generally speaking, for their communities. The crisis is here, my friend, and not there.
I actually think, my friend Gidi, it's nice to argue with you.
Pretty soon they're not going to be friends.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually think that part of the opportunity we have here is to import diaspora-style Judaism to Israel. Bottom-up Judaism, not all or nothing Judaism, not either dati or chiloni. Actually, I think our opportunity is to bring that Judaism in Israel. The same Judaism that's not really, I think, succeeding in the diaspora. I think liberal Judaism is a great idea. It's just in the wrong place.
I actually think that, okay, it's a different story. We won't go back and forth. Liberal Judaism was always there. It was liberal Judaism doing Hellenism. There was liberal Judaism in the 9th, 10th, 11th century. There was always a liberal voice in Judaism, which is essential for enriching the vitality of the Jewish community at large, Jewish society. And there's always an interplay between the Orthodox voice that rejects the new voice and the new voices that are always there. We know of the people that are exiles of the first temple in Babylon. They went to Babylon, they came back, intermarried and assimilated. So we know that 27 centuries ago, we faced the issue of assimilation. The point is, it's been going on for a very long time. We have an ecosystem that is magnificently balancing all of these voices for so long. Israel is the major disruption for this ecosystem, and that's what we need to focus on. The problem is here. I want to say just one word about Tikkun Olam.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, because that was the question.
I just want to say, my dear friends Micha and Gidi, that I find this very narrow and disappointing. Tikkun Olam is not about liberal, not only about, and just about liberal Judaism in Israel. And I'm saying that as
your
the
question
past,
wasn't about Tikkun Olam. Your question is about what are we accountable for?
aren't we accountable for Tikkun Olam? Didn't you listen to Rachel?
Rachel is accountable for Tikkun Olam.
But I still want to emphasize.
I'm a liberal too.
I still want to emphasize that I think there's something beyond our Israeli diaspora, religious, spirituality, liberalism, particularism story. What are our responsibilities to the rest of the world?
I think that the circles of responsibilities stand directly from the founding stories of the Jewish people. For those of us, I'm not sure in this room, because you guys in RI do a great job of bringing these ultra-sophisticated, multifaceted individuals together.
It's called hipsters.
Yeah. But emerging adulthood, I read. So the point, but if you're truly a nation who Jew, you care about Israel. Your circle of responsibility is Israel. If you're a people who Jew, your circle of responsibility is Jews all over the world. And you care about the Jews of Buenos Aires when there was a crisis 10 years ago. And you care about the old woman in the Ukraine that no longer has food. And then you care about the 5 Jews that are left in Afghanistan. And, you know, that's your spectrum of responsibility. Many Israelis may not connect to that. If you're an Or LaGoim Jew, you care about the world. You want to change the world. And if you're a person of covenant and faith, your responsibility is upstairs, is somewhere else. You live a life of observance and faith. Most of
I
us...
think you're wrong.
I think you're wrong. Too.
That's
How many of us think he's wrong?
Okay, it's okay. But most of us are hybrid. We are a hybrid of multiple stories. And we take and we look at different combinations of these stories. And this is the beauty of our religion, because of our society, not religion, because it gives us a menu of opportunities for a circle of responsibility. And if you look around this room and here on this panel, we actually embody that notion that there are multiple circles of responsibility and people relate to different elements. My one point is, and my one point of criticism is that a lot of time we confuse the stories. For example, in the area of Tikkun Olam. I believe that Tikkun Olam actually means the challenge of moving the needle on global issues. Now, on so many cases that I've seen Tikkun Olam, it's not about moving the needle. It's about the participant. I wanted this Tikkun Olam program and I met my girlfriend. That's the story.
And got a
It's about
t-shirt.
Jewish identity. So I'm going out there to, you know, to hammer some nails into some hut in, where was the, you know, where there was a flood?
Rwanda. Oh.
Bangladesh.
Haiti.
Wherever.
Haiti.
I'm going out there, I'm
Wherever.
hammering a few nails into some hut. I feel great about myself. I go back, and that's not really changing the world. These are labor-intensive activities. We Jews are few, so we cannot really excel through labor-intensive activities. We send out people who are not professionals, who are total amateurs in what they do. They're not carpenters. They're not anything else. So we don't even send the profession. So we have all of these activities out there that are called Tikkun Olam, but they're actually, and that's totally legitimate, they are peoplehood activities. These are peoplehood projects using Tikkun Olam opportunities in order to build identity. And the real challenge is, I think, and that's where only Israel and diaspora, true partnership, moving the needle on global issues, we in Israel need the Jewish diaspora. The Jewish diaspora can only do it with Israel. There is no critical mass without that partnership. And this is where we can really do huge things 21st century.
I agree with the last point, not most of what came before it, but that Tikkun Olam, I see it not only as our purpose, I see it as our solution to our issue, which is that we're so divided, that we're so extreme. You talked about sort of the pilpel of the extreme on both sides. I'm a yoga teacher. You're going to come to my yoga class in the morning, Mr. Flexigidity. And I believe in the integration of the two.
I would have come, but your yoga class is about flexibility.
Tikkun Olam has the ability to unite us across all of our differences. If we are serving together, and if we're doing it right, we're not doing it on the backs of poor people. We're doing it in partnership with the countries. We're doing it in partnership with the local people. We're doing it in an authentic way. And yes, there are programs that aren't done well, and we need to change that. But real service and real Tikkun Olam is making real change and moving the needle, like you said. And if we do that together across our religious differences, across our ideological differences, across our geographic differences, that's the only way that we can move the needle. And I see it as the solution. We can't be doing it on the back support, but we have to be doing it in the name of eradicating poverty, seeking justice, and working in partnership with the people to make change in those countries and in ourselves. We can change ourselves while we're changing the world. And that's, I think, you're saying building our identity on the backs. I don't think it's that. I think we can do it out of Jewish values. We can do it from a place that we can become better humans. We can become more holy. We can serve a higher source better if we're serving others.
Thank you. Wow. I have to say that I feel like buzzing and I want to write things and think again and call you all and ask more questions. Before we move to hear the questions from the audience, just last thoughts, comments, things you must say before we open the floor? Yes.
my dear friend Giddy. Is that how we begin now? And now I've like, made him, machatanim, so it's like, now he's like a family member. But you're, if I'd met you while hammering nails into a building in a war-torn flood area, I'm not sure that wouldn't be tikkun olam. I'm not sure that our definition of that we have to rehabilitate a society at every level, and if Jewish peoplehood doesn't happen as part of that, if that's not also tikkun olam. I think it's a way in which you have to understand the bigger framework for tikkun olam, and that those alliances and that building of Jewish peoplehood will give us more strength in order to move that needle. So I guess I see it, I'm trying to sort of get us to see it in tikkun olam as the Rambam does, in a much broader, much broader context. The resources, though, to answer the dilemmas that are on our table today, the three questions that I put before us: is there full gender equality in the Jewish community? Is non-Orthodox Judaism legitimate in the state of Israel? Do diaspora Jews and Israeli Jews really matter to each other? All the resources and all the brain power and all the creativity to respond to those questions and all of your questions, I think, is in this room. I think the people sitting in this room today have the capacity and the resources and the wisdom and the creativity and the leadership skills to be able to respond to all those dilemmas. The challenge will be the challenge that the chief rabbi put before us. Right now, here's the irony. The Reform rabbi is now quoting the chief rabbi. But I'm quoting the chief Ashkenazi rabbi of pre-state Israel in the 20s and 30s, namely Abraham Isaac Cook, who said that our responsibility and our job in terms of bringing these concepts of modernity and Judaism and a sovereign state together, our responsibility is that the old, hayashan yitchadesh, the old has to be made new, tradition has to be renewed, and that which is new concepts will have to be made yitkadesh. They will have to be made holy. And that's where your creativity and your capacities in this room are going to be. We're going to need you to come to the fore and to respond to all of these questions. And so it is such a great honor and great pleasure to say to you, follow the rabbi's word. See if you can make new that which is old and sanctify that which is new with all of your capacities, with all of your knowledge, with all of your talent. And then I think, Lisa, will have every reason to be phenomenally optimistic.
Kain Yehi Ratzon.
Amen.
That's all I can say to that.
Any comments before we open the floor? Floor. People. Not everyone together, one by one. We're going to take 5 questions at a time. And we have 20 minutes for this, so Regev, shoot.
Can they say who they are?
Yes. And please say who you are and when you're from, because it's very hard to see anything with this light.
Thank you, all of you, for this fascinating thought. Question for Dr. Goodman. You mentioned in your opening thing about the women of the wall. You referred to the intra-religious reason for why separating religions. And now, I come from a secular way of life, and I have many reasons for that. But you presented the Protestant model. What I want to ask you is, since it derives from a Protestant religion and Protestant state of mind, do you think it has actually real chances of working with Jewish religion within Orthodox Jewish community?
We will take a few questions in a row, otherwise, well, I just want to hear as many as possible. Yes.
My name is Lorena, I'm from Lithuania. I just need to clarify, was it my English problem, or did I hear a Freudianic saying that from all the mistakes that Israel did, not talking about bringing Soviet Jews, others, is it possible that I heard that you think that bringing Soviet Jews to Israel was a mistake?
No, I didn't say that.
From Gide?
No, didn't say that.
No, just the ingathering of all
No.
Jews in one place.
I said that the logic of Zionism, of ingathering all Jews in one place, is fundamentally compromising to the survivability of the Jewish people. And the logic of Zionism, up to a point where it had a logic, but beyond that, a vibrant diaspora is a Zionist imperative.
If I understand correctly, you're referring to, Gidi mentioned the shared battle to rescue the Jews of former Soviet Union
Nice.
ended. We don't have that anymore. We're not sad that the battle has been solved and they're free. We're sad that this shared battle, the shared cause that brought the whole of the Jewish world together doesn't longer exist because of the perestroika and the ability to immigrate. So thank you for the clarification.
Don't go back.
I apologize in advance for the slightly longer question, and I'm also Israeli, and I'm trying to fake an American accent, except when I'm very nervous.
It's very difficult,
So-
believe me. And your name is?
Mati Kovler.
Mati, yes.
And so thank you very much for this very exposed discussion, really, and very thought-provoking. Thank you all for being so open with us. It's a pleasure to hear that, and also sometimes funny and interesting at the same time. I heard a lot of things about the crisis that everybody is facing. The Israeli Jews facing the crisis, the North American communities, which is divided, the androgynous split Judaism, and that there is no exciting Israel to excite us. And as a matter of fact, only the last sentence that Rabbi Beit Alachmi said about the sanctifying, the new, that which is all being sanctified, referred to the actual, to what I perceive as an artist, I'm a composer, as something that might be a solution. And I'm just, from my observation, the social glue, because we're all looking for the social glue, and the discussion is evolving around peoplehood, at least in these circles, right? The word peoplehood. And in my observation, and you quoted Theodor Herzl, who, by the way, in the same book, which is romanticized, of course, speaks about going to Haifa and going to an opera about Shabtai Tzvi, by the way.
To the capital city, Haifa, the
Yes,
capital city of
wonderful,
Israel.
Wonderful, and they're wearing their gloves and all the evening things, and they go to hear an opera about Shabtai Tzvi. And by the way, Shabtai Tzvi is a tremendous example of something that inspired the Jewish, for better or worse. You can
And
argue.
the question is?
And now the question is, I apologize
No,
in
it's
advance.
fine.
Now the question is, what kind of social glue do you actually? What kind of creative solutions? Can you speak about creative solutions? Because in my observation as an artist, the only thing I see in common between the Israeli society and the Jewish diaspora is the complete marginalization, is that the word, of the arts. I think it's almost criminal, and I'm not afraid to use this word. It's criminal to neglect the arts versus entertainment.
Great.
While the art can be, in my observation, perhaps the only social glue that can bring together many. So I'm interested to hear more solutions and your
Thank you.
ways of dealing. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Sorry about the law.
No, it's great. Thank you. Yes.
Sam Koenig, currently living in Baltimore.
No one's perfect.
No, but my accent, right? Baltimorean accent. Proud. No. My question is, I was wondering what role do those Israelis play who have made Berlin, Toronto, New York, LA, Warsaw, London their what they call home? And I'm sure, I mean, I'm not a statistician, but I'm sure we are surpassing now approximately over 150,000 Israelis, or even more, who live in those places.
Close to a million.
Close to a million. So what role, and I was wondering also why you didn't mention them, because if it's over a million, what role do they play in this conversation? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for the discussion. My name's Jamie. I'm English, and I am a man, and I'm also a feminist. And I thought it would be worth someone saying that I was surprised to hear some of the views that were expressed on the panel about the role of women, in particular, what I would call the social and sexual division of labor that was outlined. Gidi, you're obviously a very learned man, so I think you can take it. But I think if you're asking about what diaspora Jews feel about the sorts of narratives that take place, I think many would be surprised at the language that suggests that because Haredi marriages involve less arguing about taking out the bins, that women should accept a different and inferior place in society. I have a question as well, though.
I was
You want to know
waiting.
Giddy takes out the
I know,
garbage,
sorry, this
right?
is very naughty of me, but I did feel it had to be said.
Do you take out the garbage, Giddy?
What do you think?
They have a shared time agreement over the
because
garbage.
I am the secular person in the family, I get to do all the Shabbos Goy responsibilities.
Oh, Baruch Hashem, Baruch Hashem. Anyway, Jamie, sorry.
When no one sees, I even push the button of the dishwasher on Friday night, but
God
don't
forbid.
tell anybody.
One thing which I will definitely take away from this, which I perhaps didn't know before, is that as a diaspora Jew, I'm in a crisis. I hadn't realized it until now. But what the sort of question I have is, and I genuinely, I'm not being facetious now when I ask you this, what would you have me do as an Orthodox but also small L liberal English person who for most people in England is an emissary from the state of Israel? That's how many people will see me when discussions of Israel come up. And they won't really distinguish between my Judaism and your Israeli citizenship, which I don't hold. So what would you have me do? What in your view, is the ideal role for someone like me? I'm genuinely interested to learn.
Thank you, Jamie. We'll answer very briefly and shortly. I know it's a crime. Your questions deserve a long learned answer, but we don't have the time. We just have 12 more minutes. So please, they will ask. I want us to do 5 minutes of answers and then more questions. Okay? I know it's a crime what I'm doing here, but what can I do? The clock is ticking.
Okay, I'll address very quickly Regov's great question. His question was, can we apply the American model of separation of church and state to Israel, knowing that Judaism is not a Protestant religion? And for that reason, we probably can. The following sense: since Judaism is both a nation and a religion, therefore Israel could have a Jewish character without religious legislation. For example, any legislation that promotes the national character of our Jewish people, like having the Hebrew language our national language, like having Hebrew time being our time, having the Jewish ethnicity reflected in Chok HaShvut, those are
Law of return.
law of return. Those are laws that I would promote. But any laws try to promote Judaism as a religion, like Chok HaChametz, like there's a law in Israel that you're not allowed to publicly sell
Unleavened bread.
chametz in Pesach, and all the laws trying to monopolize conversion and marriage and divorce. Those are laws I would try to let go, and as a result, because of the special, unique nature of Judaism, we could be a Jewish state, and at the same time separate synagogue from state.
Thank you, Micha.
Rachel, do you want to answer? Jamie. And who from Baltimore? I forgot.
Sam.
Sam.
Nobody's perfect.
And where were you before that? Ah, fantastic. So actually my response to you about the million Israelis living all over the world, what I call the Israeli diaspora, and to Jamie in England, where's Jamie? To Jamie in England is actually a very similar response. You have a phenomenal opportunity to play the role of Hamelitz Beinehem, right? The one who can be the interpreter and the social translator and mediator between the very, very difficult questions and issues that Israel is dealing with and how they're understood in these places. You then have to be, and Israelis are to some degree, and you are capable to be, you have to be the most important spokespeople in the public sphere that help respond to the big questions facing Israel, right? What does it mean to be a Jewish democracy? Why do we need a Jewish state? How is Israel ethical, even in an occupation and in the battlefield? How is Israel a values nation? I mean, I think all of the positive, very, very powerful messages of Israel, not only as startup nation, but as values nation, are huge opportunities and very important messages that you should be constantly conveying and being the top people who are educated to be able to communicate about those things. The Israeli, we can't even call them Yordim anymore, I think, right? I don't know whether to call it an Israeli diaspora, Israeli Americans, right?
Expats.
And they're not even like expats because they're having children that are more American than they are Israeli, or sometimes more Israeli than they are Jewish. It's a very complex community. But to finish just the response is that your job is to be the most powerful cultural, intellectual translator and communicators that you can be in the public sphere. And that will serve not only Israel, but it will be a very powerful force amongst the Jewish communities wherever you are.
Thank you. Lisa.
I want to echo a lot of what you said. I have trouble, I don't use the word diaspora Jewry anymore. I don't use the word diaspora because yes, in the sense of dispersion, but not in the sense of galut, of being in exile. And I think that this is a flat world, and we are all boundary crossers, and that's a positive thing. And there are Israelis and Americans going back and forth between the U.S. and Israel, North America and Israel, all over the world, and those are opportunities. And what is the social glue between us? It's the arts, it's innovation, it's service, it's working together to take responsibility for our fellow Jews and our fellow people around the world. All of that is the glue. There's no silver bullet here. That's why we've tried to create a diverse community. Everybody here has their role to play in contributing and to crossing those boundaries, and to uniting across those boundaries. And every piece of it is the social glue.
Thank you, Lisa. Briefly, Gidi?
I want to address Jamie's question because it was directed at me. And I want to say that you self-describe yourself as a liberal, progressive, etc., etc. Just remember that Judaism challenged that prevailing notion over and over again in history and proved more right than wrong. I'll give you one example. Today in America, last year I lived in the United States of America, people don't have money, size of apartments are shrinking. The number one space in the family that goes out the door is the family space. Now in Judaism, there is the Shabbat table. Now you could say it's an anachronistic idea, who does Shabbat table, and so on. At the end of the day, the principle of Judaism that the family gets together once a week, I think will outlast what is going on in America today in terms of the breakdown of American families, American USA. So this is a very powerful trend. You're looking at it and you're saying it's a powerful trend, they must be right. We have a different proposition. So what I'm trying to say is that between this feminist, very radical, I'm polarizing now, that there is no differences whatsoever in society. There is the proposition of Judaism that says there are distinct roles in society. We can debate these roles. It's a Talmudic process, and that changes over time. And the distinction between the roles of men and women 1,000 years ago, 1,500 years ago, two millennia ago was different. But this is an evolving process of deliberation about the relative role of men and women. They're not the same. This is the basic proposition of Judaism. And I think it's a very powerful proposition moving forward, and it is likely to last at least as long as those that say that there is no difference whatsoever, except biology.
Thank you. We don't have time. I want to take a few more questions. I'm sorry for committing this crime. Please be very short and brief because we have to finish this in 5 minutes.
Cool. Thank you.
Yes.
My name is Yehuda. I'm here from Cape Town. I have 2 points. The first one is a quick poll. If I can ask, the question is for my colleagues,
No.
and it goes
Question?
to Jewish identity.
No. No. Later.
Okay. So then the other comment is, as far as I understand, Tikkun Olam is not about going and fixing things in other places. That's what the Hindus would call seva, which is service. Tikkun Olam, especially with reference to that kind of halachic understanding, is something that relates very much to the individual, certainly as a first step. And that Tikkun Olam that relates to going and fixing, it's a statement.
Thank you. If we can have questions, please. We're very brief.
We'll have a Beit Midrash on Tikkun Olam with all the texts in front of us later.
Yes. Thank you.
Hi. With great respect for the people on the panel.
And your name?
My name is Yvonne Marzouk. And with great respect for the people on the panel, I have to say that I was really saddened and frustrated by the sort of lack of Orthodox viewpoint that I was feeling represented. Mm-hmm. And the dialogue about Orthodox Jews that occurred on this panel, I felt did not represent me and did not represent a whole universe of Orthodox Judaism. And from my own community, I can express people hearing this kind of language and being very offended by it, and I don't think you understand the divisiveness that's caused by the kind of language that happens in places like this. So my question is...
Can you give us an example?
Yeah, so there was recently a study published.
No, about what we said.
Oh,
that
in this
might have
panel,
been
well, first of
offensive.
all, I'm a person and a woman, and I'm a person, a people, even though I don't feel like I want to be davening with the women of the wall. And I feel like saying that the ultra-Orthodox community is separating itself and that we don't have any choice or responsibility about how to deal with that is just not fair, and no different from the separations that they're causing. And if we want to be responsible for things, I think we need to be responsible for ourselves and what we can do and how we speak about these things to build bridges. So my question is, how will you empower this change of bringing people together across the Jewish community instead of kind of complaining about it and what feels like adding to the fire of distance between the communities?
Thank you very much, Ivana.
I was going to ask the exact same question, but she did it way better.
Okay, thank you. Yes. The last question, so if it's a question, go on. Yes.
Hi, my name is Jordan Namaro. I'm from the United States. My question is for Rabbi Rachel. I'm curious to hear your perspectives about the relationship between Jewish feminism as it plays out in the United States and the Israeli feminist movement in Israel.
Thank you. Can you just say the topic of your question without asking it so we can go further? I just want to hear a voice.
Naomi from Montreal. Anti-Semitism as a unifying force, and now that it's decreasing in certain places, does it leave a vacuum? Does it leave a vacuum?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Who wants to respond?
First of all, tislechuli. It certainly did not mean at all to offend anybody at all in the Orthodox or ultra-Orthodox community. I didn't say and didn't mean to say that somebody who doesn't daven with women of the wall doesn't see women as equals or as people too. My statement was really a statement about Israeli democracy and Israeli society allowing for the possibility for women who choose to be able to play public roles and engage in sacred spaces in the public sphere. I was kind of hoping that my story about my friend Nurit in Beitar Illit, who also has a daughter named Tehillah, and how much I respect them and want them to respect us as an indication of my really deep appreciation, respect, love for. I think there's a kind of mutual sacred envy sometimes of the roles that we play. So I want to make that perfectly clear. I've even lived a good chunk of my life in an Orthodox context. So I apologize if any critique was understood. It really was a critique of Israel as a democracy and how we understand our sacred spaces and not of orthodoxy.
I know Micha has to leave, and I know I'm cutting you, but I know that Micha has a very busy schedule. So let's just say goodbye to Micha and thank him for his participation. Do you want to say last words? Any?
When you were speaking, I was asking, were you criticizing me because maybe somebody thought that I'm the Orthodox representative here and therefore I'm supposed... But I want to say one thing. That one of the paradoxes of open people and that open people all over the world have to face is the following question: are you open only to open people? And many times openness has boundaries, and the boundaries are when you interact with people that themselves are ideologically not open. And I think that's the challenge of pluralism in Israel today. Can we be pluralistic towards communities that themselves are not pluralistic? And I think that's the greatest challenge to pluralism in Israel today. And I think it's played out in Israel, especially towards the Haredi community, where the Haredi community today in Israel, on the one hand, they represent an ideology of closing their community, but also reflecting something hypocritic about the secular community, where the ideology of openness closes down once you interact with a closed community.
Thank you, Micha.
Toda.
Thank you.
The question about the differences between feminism in North America and feminism here? The relationship. It's an excellent question that I actually feel like I can't give a long enough answer to. I actually think they have a lot. I'll just briefly make a comment that we have an awful lot to learn from each other.
Yeah.
We have so much to learn from each other, and I think the cross-fertilization that really Lisa was speaking about, and in a way I hope this panel and so many of you embody, is what we can learn from each other about ethics in every field, and also about the kind of mutual critique that we should be engaging in from all of your various stances. That's the power of a postmodern reality, is that we can engage in hopefully mutually respectful but very serious mutual critique.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think both of these comments were very good. I also apologize if I offended. Certainly did not mean to. And I think part of when you start opening up these conversations, you have to be careful of your language, and you're also raw sometimes. And we have to listen to each other. It all comes down to respect. It all comes down to, can we respect each other's ability to think a certain way, pray a certain way, live a certain way, lead a certain way? And I think we all need to have respect and listen. And I guess the person who made a statement, not a question, I will say, Tikkun Olam is at multiple levels. And you can call it Seva and you can call it whatever you want, but in the Kabbalistic sense, Tikkun Olam is about repairing yourself in order to repair the universe. What we do as people affects the universe. And that comes down to the work that we all need to do internally. It starts, what are the circles? It starts at home. We need to do our own tikkun. And then we need to do tikkun with others, and then it will all reflect out. The world will be a much more beautiful, respectful, and fulfilled place.
Thank you.
Amen.
Amen.
My closing comment would be that it was never better to be a Jew. Never, ever in history. We're at the peak of our power and prosperity between the State of Israel and the Jewish community of the USA. And then when you look at other Jewish communities in Australia, in Canada, in other places, never better to be a Jew. But we have rarely been as vulnerable as well. We are moving way too fast in terms of changing the DNA of our communities. We are over-concentrated in two locations, that is the United States of America and Israel, 80% of our people. In that respect, we have rarely been as vulnerable. And that is a tremendous challenge for our generation and for the people in this room. Part of what you see as a response to the peak of Jewish power and prosperity is the rise in anti-Semitism. Again, when we're weak, it's one thing, but when we're strong, they come at us again. And with very strong force, very vicious and pernicious arguments today, placing Israel as the embodiment of the Jewish project, and then going after Israel, that's the delegitimization of Israel. And within that ecosystem of change, there is dramatic significance to those of us among us that are the conservatives, that question the new idea that seems sexy and appealing, and let's move forward with force and with confidence. Forget the old traditions, forget the history, forget all of that. It's very, very important to have these orthodox voices in our society that pull the brake on change. Ask a question, raise an eyebrow about all these new ideas that are really, really fast-moving and so on. Now, we have to remember that Judaism was always a balance between unity and adversity. Judaism was not, as I said at the beginning, it's not about hand-holding. It's not about between a black and a white looking for the gray. Rachel will be the white, I will be the black. We will fight it out in the public sphere, because at the end of the day, we are all here. Both are the words of God. We're all here to serve the community. And this brings us to the social glue. And here I'm back to this as a final note. It's not about art. The social glue of Judaism is one Torah. We all drink from the same source. We read it in different ways. As a secular Orthodox, one Torah. Just imagine if we had multiple Torahs. Matrilineal descent. The child of a Jewish mother is a Jew. You may be a communist, I may be a capitalist. I cannot exclude you, you cannot exclude me. You could be a secular, I can be an ultra-Orthodox. The ultra-Orthodox cannot exclude the women of the world from the Jewish people and vice versa. Just think about what a powerful, unifying force matrilineal descent is. And I'm not getting into the debate of patrilineal descent, yes or no, and conversions. Just focusing on that. So we have very strong mechanisms of unity that allow us
tremendous, profound adversity and diversity. And that's the dialectic nature of our society, and that's why it's so powerful and so resilient. Then I want to finish with a message to all of us here in the room. Because our society is moving so fast, our challenge as people that are taking responsibility and leaders is to try to place our leadership initiative in the broader context of Judaism, Jewish history, past, present, future, and the broader context of Jewish society. Each and every one of us is operating from a different place in the ecosystem. Israel, diaspora, USA, Argentina, whatever. We're different in terms of our religious affiliations. But in terms of the motivation, if we're here to serve the collective and not one faction or another, if we place our intervention in the context of broader, past, present, future, Jewish history, then we are part of this force that will preserve the capability, the adaptability of the Jewish people that's been the secret of our, the answer to Mark Twain's question about what is the secret of Jewish immortality.
Thank you, Gidi. I want to use the power facilitator and just to answer what Yvonne brought up. And I think in these kind of conversations, it's okay if many of us feel a little bit uncomfortable. It's not okay if it's one person or one group or one sector. I have to say that during what we heard, I felt uncomfortable several times from different parts of the room. And I think that is the nature of a good conversation. And a healthy conversation is one when someone suddenly say, hey, you're hurting me in what you're saying now. So I want to thank you for that comment. And if we're talking about thanking, I want to thank Gidi Greenstein, Lisa Eisen, Dr. Rabbi Rachel Shabbat Bet Halachmi, and Dr. Micha Goodman for being with us today. And I want to thank ROI for making this happen. And this was not an easy panel to prepare or to facilitate. And I want to thank you for the amazing work you're doing. Thank you.